Welcome to this week's edition of Charting Change in Legal. I am Ari Kaplan, an analyst who covers the legal industry, and I'm here with my friend.
Caroline Hill. Hi, editor of Legal IT Insider. Great to be here, Ari.
Yes, it's wonderful to see you, and I'm excited for this conversation. And many things seem to have transpired over the last few weeks since we spoke, and it is already an exciting year.
It is. It's amazing how much you can pack now into a month. We came back from Christmas, and you and I spoke about how we retain that clarity of thought, and that calm and the zen and the all of those good things that you have over Christmas, and then yeah, that's all gone now.
Although it does, what I love is that it really does present a pretty remarkable opportunity for professionals in legal who can think broadly and look at the market holistically because as things change, the people who are dealing with the change need advisors. They need some kind of guidance. And the challenge is finding people who really understand what's changing
Yeah.
and being able to separate just commentary from meaningful guidance. And that's a powerful issue. I think that same is true in the sort of political business climate because that's changed also, and people really need to understand what is has a legal effect, what is possible, and in legal as a microcosm of that, it's really important for people to know and know who to talk to.
Yeah. And likewise, yeah, it's interesting. I had a big debate on LinkedIn on the so that's sort of almost from the practice point of view, from legal practice and advisory. But then we had a big debate on LinkedIn the other day about some of the continued challenges around people making mistakes with Gen AI and whether training should be compulsory. There's obviously massive opportunities from that perspective in terms of new possibilities around training and but also that question over how do we approach this year, how do we equip ourselves adequately, whether that be from taking advice or whether that be on a sort of more back end perspective. Should you be doing training? Yes. Should training be compulsory? Yes. This was the debate whether it should be compulsory, to be fair. And then what that looks like, right? Like what does it even look like? What should we be training on? And this interesting debate over whether the regulators should now make Gen AI training compulsory. It's coming in and to a certain extent within Europe with the EU AI Act, but given that in America there's not even compulsory legal tech competence. It's like, should we be saying that everyone should have training? It's just such an interesting time.
Waiting for a mandatory some type of entity regulated training seems too late. And I'm confident that people, at least many of the people I talk to, recognize that you need to be proactive about this. I mean, I hosted a breakfast, a legal tech mafia breakfast in mid-January. I have another one in mid-March, and I've been doing what feels like a ton of podcasts and other conversations on the virtual lunch about agentic AI, generative AI, AI for timekeeping, AI for document creation, AI for document review. I'm about to start my e-discovery unfiltered research, and I get the sense that the best thing people can do, aside from tactically learn specifics about usage, is to be part of as many conversations, not time wasting conversations, but just really thoughtful conversations with people who are really kneading the dough, just like in it, digging through it, trying to figure out how to develop tools that operate in a seamless, automated way, but safely, ethically. And I don't think that you can really do that as well if you're not having thoughtful conversations and even understand just the language that's being used around these products.
Yeah. I got the feedback that came back from this debate was that you're absolutely right about it's not going to come from the regulator anytime soon. And even the court. So this was sparked by a court, another Australian lawyer who's used ChatGPT to create a brief, and the number of fictitious cases was very funny. Not shouldn't be funny, but it was very funny. But the feedback, the court didn't have any official guidance. You know, this particular court, I'm not a pro on the different courts in Australia, but this was in New South Wales, and they don't have their own official guidance. And I wrote a piece saying, well, I really feel like they probably should by now. But and then we had this debate on LinkedIn, and yeah, the regulator isn't going to be the one. The courts, in many cases, are not the one, but on a firm by firm basis, that's where the clear mandate is, that you compulsory training is in many cases compulsory. Even if it's just basic training, it's very difficult to know what you should be trained on, but there's very basic. Many firms came back on LinkedIn and said that it's compulsory. I guess the issue arises, and where a lot of these mistakes are creeping up are often much smaller firms or sole practitioners. And I hate to stereotype, but in the cases that we've seen in Australia, they're older. Well, this one certainly was older and had some health issues, etc. But so those are not going to be caught by your big law firms with their big training programs. That's one of the issues. But yeah, mandatory training at a firm-wide level seem to be the feedback as to what's happening right now.
Well, there are two things I would say to that. One is the tools have gotten so much better and so much more sophisticated and so much more reliable since the very first case. And I think that you can still use some of these tools, the proven brand name tools in legal for these activities, assuming there's oversight. I mean, we have to be honest. You'd need to have oversight no matter what. A partner would have to review even an exceptional senior associate's work. So I don't really understand how this keeps happening, but be that as it may, the tools have gotten better and you can rely on them in a much better way. So it's going to continue to streamline the work. The other thing you mentioned about the courts and looking for guidance and getting resources. Every single time I speak now and this topic comes up, I always say there's a massive opportunity for law students, for practitioners of all ages, for practitioners to their clients, from practitioners to the courts, from government to like there is a chance for each of us to share what we've learned to contribute to the greater elevation of the profession because the clients are actually wondering what their firms are doing. They don't always have the kind of budgets that the larger firms have to do all of this great experimentation. Students have more time. If they're smart, they're learning in a way that's more granular than practitioners. They could bring this up in interviews and conversations. The same is true for paralegals or junior associates to senior professionals. There's just a wonderful chance here for us all to add, the one layer beyond whatever the surface is to what we know to the conversation. And people should recognize that you don't have to be a complete expert. You don't have to be bona fide with a PhD and data science background to contribute because many smart voices together will help all of these organizations, the corporate legal
Mm.
departments, the law firms, the schools really progress.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting just to go back to two points. So one with your why it keeps happening and the oversight. So obviously we keep coming back to the sourcing, right? They have to have sourcing, and that's where ChatGPT, which is a great tool, doesn't have sourcing. And but I mean, yes, you should have that oversight. But these tools that are getting so much better, like you say, they take you to the source, so you can it streamlines it. It makes it part of your workflow. It's all very well, I suppose, to say you need to verify all of these things. Of course you do. It's kind of what lawyers do, right? This is what we do. This is you and I are both trained as lawyers. But the legal tools make it easier by click on that and it takes you to the source. I've noticed ChatGPT is starting to do this actually with the latest versions. But anyway, so sourcing. But then with the voices and the collaboration, it's interesting. I think we've seen this year the sort of evolution of law firms creating, I guess you might call it white label Gen AI products, like so McFarlane's, which uses Harvey, obviously leading UK firm. They've now created something called Amplify. This is released at the end of January, which is helping their clients it's something that we've seen law firms do in the past with various things, and might be in the derivative space, the stuff that sort of Alan Overy is doing it now, A.O. Sherman, where you're sort of white labeling, using technology and like enabling your clients to use it. I think I've seen within the last week or two a couple of examples of that, like of where people with potentially bigger IT budgets are then creating a product that might help other people, for example, clients that don't have the resources, but then can sort of start to leverage their products in a safe way.
It's just a very, I mean, if I were to have anticipated what this would be like, a month plus into the year, it's exactly where we are. There's been consolidation, there have been additional investments. You're starting to see successful European companies entering the US market. You're trying to see US companies trying to broaden their horizon and their reach. And I don't, as much as there have been a lot of surprises in terms of movement, I don't think there's anything shocking that's occurred in the same way that generative AI was introduced into the market a couple of years ago. So I think that in some ways it's been busy and change driven, and in other ways it's sort of, well, we are in this dynamic place. So some change is expected. And even if it's happening faster, you mentioned we are a month into the year and it feels like more, like 6 months. And I always say that too. I always say, when you give a time horizon like 3 to 5 years, you sound incredibly antiquated because the time horizon is now 6 months or a year. 3 to 5 years sounds extraordinarily long, and your anticipation of what will change sounds just too slow.
It is too slow. But and I would also say that I would kind of disagree in our
Whoa, no way.
I disagree with the thing about not things not changing.
Yeah.
So I would jump in with DeepSeek, right? I think that there's been another massive sea change this month with so the fact that so many parts about it, like the fact that it has sort of combusted everything that we understood in terms of how much it takes to train one of these large language models and what that costs. And also, obviously, whereas it's been America leading the way, now you've got this Chinese company which has kind of blown everything up, and there was, as you know, the market's tanked or Nvidia's stocks tanked for a while, and there was massive uncertainty. There's been, so many ramifications around not just what happens with DeepSeek now. Now you've obviously got regulators looking at it, and there's people considering what you can do on that level, what should be done. But the toothpaste is out of the tube because so DeepSeek obviously public LLM. You can use it on your website, but it's open source, so you can download the code as people already in the thousands, millions possibly have done on GitHub, and then you can use it to build your own product, or you can use it within the safety. So law firms or vendors can look at it and use it within the safety of their own environment, and they can use it to build their own product. So it's gone, right? It's in terms of this is so now obviously there's going to be a period you would hope of looking at the code, and obviously you can do that on GitHub, and you can look at, I mean, it's amazing. It's the first time that people have been able to do this. It's been a really closed shop with a few providers really, but now it's going to blow the market wide open, and that has multiple ramifications in terms of there's just going to, we thought it was fast, last year, but I think this is going to mean that law firms are suddenly more inundated with products from different providers, I think, and they're going to, if they're not already feeling quite assured of what that means and how to test them and, all of these things, they're going to find it more of a challenge this year in a major way, because the market, I think, from speaking to people who know a lot more about this than I do, like it's going to be potentially flooded now.
Yes, and DeepSeek won't be the first to pop in and shock. Obviously, the markets have recovered in many ways. That happened and then it didn't happen. And my sense, you're absolutely right. There will be a lot of providers in the space, and yet I think firms will adopt a kind of an ecosystem. They will adopt a Gen AI tool. They will adopt a document management. As they've done, this will just be added into their suite. I think it's still, it still remains to be seen. We don't know enough about the, it seems to me that we don't know enough about all the details, the infrastructure, the code, what happens with your information for DeepSeek for people to be people with ethical responsibilities and security protocols to just rush in. Maybe they experiment in a sandbox. Even that, I think the issue probably isn't when one comes out, it's when three, and all of a sudden there's a competitive landscape at the lowest end of that market. And you're right, the pricing is incredible, the way that they've structured it, the costs, but that may also lead to an expectation that in all of business you have a higher tier, lower tier, and there have different use cases. In legal, my sense is that, we're so focused on the higher quality, more recognized tools for now.
Yeah, and
It's not really a disagreement.
do you know, it's outright
Yeah,
disagreement.
that's right. Yikes.
Um, I think you're right. I think, well, look, let's get back to agreeing, which was what we
Yeah,
did.
yeah. Because the Zoom battle was exhausting.
Oh my
Yeah,
God,
yeah,
literally.
yeah,
Thank God I was a litigator one
yeah.
time.
Mm.
That was intense. So so I think you're right about there's going to be big questions because DeepSeek, like they're saying, there's clearly there's worries about censorship issues, and sort of the quality of the output. Um, so there's going to be a lot of testing, right? But the fact is that I think this will downstream have a massive impact. I think some firms are pretty sophisticated and some firms are really not still, So I think there's companies that are springing up that will help them more easily test these systems. Those are definitely worth looking at, and help them to do those kind of sandboxes. I think if firms aren't doing that and capable of doing that themselves, then they need to go and get expert help from people who can help them to test different systems and learn how to leverage them safely. I think it's really, now's the time if they haven't done it already.
Well, it just makes the knowledge sharing component of our profession that much more important. You need to
Yeah.
ask your peers, and I feel fortunate to have been part of just different events, live and virtual, where people are
Mm,
honestly sharing their assessment of tools. And the other thing that I think that may be changing, that may be important, is people not simply asking peers at the firm in town or in the same state or that they know from a state bar function. Rather,
mm,
ask somebody. You and I both are friendly with Robert Miroon at the Lexpo conference, and Lexpo brings together a group of leaders from generally from continental Europe. That perspective is different than what we're experiencing in the US. And it's incredibly valuable when I hear what a firm in Germany or Austria or Ljubljana is doing because it informs the conversation. So I can come back and say, in certain firms in certain parts of the world, they're actually using it for this. Have we thought of that? Or they're
mm.
using a tool I'd never heard of, and yet there are firms with 20 offices that are using some of these applications. And I think that kind of, you know, makes the world a little bit smaller in that way, and that teams should be thinking more broadly about where they're getting some of their information because it just might be helpful to be fully informed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. There's the Paris is holding an AI summit right now, actually. Um, and that's bringing together people from across Europe to talk about safety, which is a big focus for Europe. So the AI Act came into force, the European AI Act came into force on, so it's the very start of February. And it's very much a focus on it bans certain things. And it oh actually and that yeah that I did mention it when we were talking about training, but it talks about you mustn't use AI unless you know how to use it. It's sort of it's quite it has some couple of quite bitey covenants in it. Um, and then there's the Paris Summit, which is bringing together leaders from across Europe. Will focus on some of the topics around that particularly. Actually, apparently, I was hearing it's not so much regulation actually that they're what they're talking about. This is from listening to mainstream news, to be fair, although Clifford Chance, the law firm that I work, do quite a lot of sort of write about them regularly and have written about some stuff they're doing at the summit. They're involved, but I've been listening to some more mainstream news about what the summit involves, and a lot of it is going to be more around the impact on jobs and things like that, as opposed to straight regulation, which a lot of that's covered by the AI Act. But they're going to be talking about the impact on jobs, which is something that I don't know about you, but I don't really talk about too much. Mine's sort of very much practical, day to day. People get very freaked out when you start talking about jobs. Maybe it's something that we should talk about more.
Well, it's more than jobs, it seems now, especially in legal. It's about value. It's about how are you charging? We had someone on the virtual lunch, a
Mm.
real expert in the space, and she mentioned that, for example, you might have a project that used to take the firm 20 hours. Now, with their integrated suite of tools, it only takes 5. And she commented that we can't really at this stage charge 20 hours, but we're certainly not charging 5 because the work is worth more than 5. And so there is, and I'm confident this is happening right now this year. This is not a 3 to 5 year issue. This is may not even be a 6 month issue, but getting a better understanding of the value of a project, kind of like firms. And, there are well, certainly several recognized firms that play at this highest level of saying, if this merger goes through, we are paid whatever incredible fee because the purpose of hiring us is to make sure that this merger goes through. And while that number is an incredibly high number, and if you were to divide it into number of hours, it would be an incredible number of dollars per hour, but we provide services based on value. And more organizations will try to figure this out. Some will fail at it, some will be more or less efficient, but that is the conversation. So whether that tool is any of the tools that we mentioned or some new emerging tool that shocks the market and sends stocks down for 24 hours or 40 or whatever, a week or two, I think that it's so much more important for us to think about what we can control, right? You can't control the release of some new tool in some country that we don't live in and don't control the government for, but you certainly can try to figure out, as these tools get, how does our business model
Mm.
affected? How is our training affected? How is our budget affected? And that I think is really powerful. And that anytime you can focus on the things that you can control, you can then drive change and drive it in a way that allows you to secure buy-in and improve the operations of your organization.
I think you're right. I think that I mean it's
Boom, agreement.
being an
Amazing.
ongoing amazing. That's it at the end. I think it's been an ongoing question, hasn't it? I remember being on a panel years ago with Alex Hamilton from Radiant Law because they set up years and years ago on
Yes.
the basis of value-based
One of
billing.
the
And
originals on this
one of the only
discussion
firms
and
that
has found
even
great success. Yeah.
we were on a panel together. We were talking about value-based billing, and there are, as we talked about before, probably there are pockets of firms that are doing it. It's done badly for lots of different reasons sometimes because the clients that are demanding it actually like the underlying billable hour. But I think you're absolutely right that this Gen AI is going to put pressure on this in a way that they've not seen before, and they're going to have to come up with answers, whereas before they've just kind of not had to. They've talked about it and not really had to come up with answers. I think that for the top firms, the big billers, that where time is of the essence, like the big M&A deals that you've talked about, where they can go, look, actually, if we can do this quicker, it's worth more, because it gives you that competitive edge. I think as usual, they're going to be fine. I think it's going to be the more mid-market, where they're not necessarily dealing in those mega bucks, and they're not necessarily dealing in those, super competitive processes where they're going to feel it in a really big way if they don't come up with some way to solve this, because they're not doing those super. If you're just doing somewhere between, if there's slightly repetitive work or routine work, I think they're the ones that are going to really need to work out how to fill that gap.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It also is going to require some quiet reflection because, as you say, it is going to affect different firms differently. It's going to affect different practices differently. And people are going to have expectations that firms are either going to have to push back on or reflect on and try to figure out what does this mean. But for sure, and I think this is probably like the overarching theme of our discussion today, the timing horizon has changed. If it used to be that it was 3 to 5 years, you could kick this till a year from now or 2 years from now or 3 years from now. You didn't really have to address it. You'd set up a committee and maybe wait till the next senior leader was going to be elected or installed, however that structure was working. But now that's just not the case. It's just sort of 6 months. It's how quickly can we recruit? How many do we need to recruit? I mean, there's a lot of discussion, even on the most granular level, of the recruiting process, certainly in the US, starting much earlier than it used to be, and it used to start early. And so firms are needing to plan for a time horizon that they are almost certain to change what happens in and now have to live with the planning in certain ways. So we have certain structures that are forced to be long, and yet the movement is accelerating to the point of having to navigate lots of things. So it's wonderfully interesting. I love these conversations.
I agree.
Well, thank you. Yes, I totally disagree. I can't stand you, but I'm just on because, well, who else is going to talk to me on charting change in legal?
So nice chatting with you. Thanks everyone for listening.